Okay, these are three questions, each involving grade 8 understanding of percentages, and they are combined percentages. So these three questions will appear on your test in some similar manner. The numbers, of course, will be changed, but the process for solving them will be the same. So if we look at our first question, it says a $454 microwave is discounted at 5.5%, then discounted a further tenth of a percent. What's the final price? So there are three ways to solve it. There are, of course, the first way is to just figure out what each of these is and subtract this. We're going to do the slow way, the long way for the first one. So if I think about what is 5.5% of 454, right? $454. We would change 5.5% since it's 5.5 out of 100. It's the same thing as 55 over 1,000. This is the math we've already done a lot of. So 5.5% as a decimal, well, that's 5%, and that's 5.5%. That's 55 thousandths. So the first step you had to know was how to change 5.5% to a decimal. The rest of it's pretty simple. So if you wanted to figure out how much discount is it, that would be the math you would need to do. So what is 5.5% of 454? The answer is just 24.97. Okay, now once we had that, we're not done, but we're going to take our 454, decimal 00, subtract 24.97, and we're going to end up with, 3 cents here. That's 452, or 453. That's 9. That's 2. That's 4. 429.03. Okay, that's after you take away your discount. Now the next part is, what is a tenth of a percent? A tenth of a percent, or a tenth of a percent of the 429.03. Okay, because the discounted price is going to be a tenth of a percent of that. So in order to get a tenth of a percent, our math, we can do it mentally easily, can't we? Because what do we do for a tenth of a percent? Our mental math says move the decimal 3 places. We would get 0.42903 cents, which we're going to call how much money? 43 cents. We're going to round that to the nearest penny, and we're going to call it 43 cents. So we're going to subtract a further 43 cents from that. 0, borrow is 86824. Our final answer, is that right? $428.60. Is that what people got? Okay. So that's doing the long way. Obviously, that was a lot of calculating percentages, adding and subtracting, whatever it happens to be. If it's a discount, you're subtracting. If it's a tax, you're adding. All right? But there is an easier way. And we said the easier way was to say, what is the mathematical expression for if it's discounted 5.5%, and we thought about this rectangle, and we put a line here, and 5.5% discounted, what was the percent you have to consider? You had to consider what percent you're paying for. And if it's a 5.5% discount, that means you're paying for 94.5% of it, right? That's step one, is to have that in your mind. On your test, you need to draw that, not necessarily. Some of you, it's good because it helps you. So if this microwave was discounted 5.5%, you're only paying for 94.5% of that price. That's 94.5% represented as a decimal. So 94.5% of the 454. This amount here that's now highlighted in yellow, that represents the discounted price after the initial 5.5%. And if I solve that, it should give us, I believe, this number right here. Is that correct? So what do we do with that number after we figured that out? We then had to take an additional how much off? A tenth of a percent. So if I was to redraw that again as a rectangle, this box now represents whatever amount of money this is. And if I have a tenth of a percent to save, a tenth of a percent off, what percent of that price am I paying for? 99.9%. 99.9% of the sale price, of this price right here. So therefore, I am going to pay for 99.9% of that. And if I solve this, I think I'm going to get the same answer, correct? So if we work that out, do my bed mass first. 94.5% of the microwave's cost is $429.03. So that's $429.03. That's after the initial 5.5% discount. And since I'm going to save a tenth of a percent, I'm going to pay for 99.9% of that. So I'm going to multiply that by 99.9. And my final answer will be 428.60. Just like that. Okay. Did that make sense to everybody? Right? Again, the most basic way of doing it is this one over here, where you actually calculate each individual percentage. You add if it's a tax and subtract if it's a discount and blah, blah, blah. And that's perfectly fine because it still gets you the right answer. But being able to construct this idea is really where I want you to be. But if you're not there yet, you will be eventually, hopefully. Yep. No. No, it's up to you. The second question gives us a car costing $18,000 is taxed 1.3% for whatever tax that is. Then it's further taxed 2 2/5%. What's the final price? So this is a little bit different in terms of our understanding. And if we think about this being the 18,000, instead of taking away, we're actually adding on part percentages. And we're going to talk about that in just a second. So if you do it the easy way, the long way, what's 1.3% of 18,000? So you could do it with, so this is 1%, this is 1.3%. So 1.3% of 18,000, 1.3% of 18,000 means the tax for the first tax is $234. What do I do with that number? I don't subtract it if it's a tax. I add it on. So the cost of that car now, after that initial tax, is now $18,234. But we're going to tax that amount of money 2 2/5% of that. So we need to consider what's 2 2/5%. Well, instead of saying 2 2/5, what is 2 2/5 as a decimal? 2 decimal what? That's the worst 2 ever. 2 decimal 4, because 2/5, if I go 2 divided by 5, it's decimal 4, or if I think about 2/5 as being 4/10, 4/10 is decimal 4 as well. But either way, 2 2/5%, and I'll highlight it in yellow here for you, is the same thing as 2.4%. Hopefully you all understand that. Once we know that, 2% is that amount of money, or that is a decimal, excuse me. 2.4% is 0.024. So if I calculate what this tax is going to be, I can use my calculator. What is 2.4% of 18,234? Is that right? I think so. So the tax will be how much money? 437.62. 437.62. 437.62 rounded to the nearest cent. That's the tax. What's my final step? To add that on. So I take my 18,234, add on my 437.62. Fortunately, we're adding, so 62 is easy. That's 11, that's 7, that's 6, that's 8, that's 1. The final price of your car with those two taxes would be $18,671.62. Okay? Oh, it could be. I might have made a mistake somewhere. We'll see if it does. Now, going back to the other way of doing it, the more advanced metrics way. If we think about this being 100% of the car, and this being that first initial 1.3% tax, what percent is the cost of that 18,000? It's going to be 100 and an additional 1.3%. So if I think about being 101.3% of the $18,000, right? That means I'm going to actually multiply 101.3 is 1.013 times 18,000. And that's going to be the cost of the car with the 1.3% tax on it. And that amount in brackets is going to be taxed a further 1 2/5%, which is going to be 1 and 2.4. So that 1 represents 100% of this cost right here. And the 0.24 is 2 4/10, which is the tax. So if I work this all out, it should work out properly, I think. 101.3% of the $18,000 car is this much money, which we had right here, didn't we, at the bottom, didn't we? We had it right there. So that's the amount with the first tax, and then that is going to be taxed at a rate of 1 for 100%, and that 0.24 is going to be the 2.4% tax. And when we press equals, we have the exact same answer, 18,671 decimal 6, was it? 6.2. 6, and that's the cost. Your last question is both the discount and the tax. So for this one, I'm just going to do it the best way, the fast way. I'm not going to bother doing it the slow way. You can still do it, but I'm going to show you just based on thing. So this is the cost of the jersey. That's 100% of the jersey. If it's discounted 72%, what percent of the jersey am I going to pay for? I'm going to pay for 28%, right? Because 72 plus 28 equals 100. So once it's discounted, I am only going to pay for 28% of the $160 jersey. That's the discounted price, right? And if I put that in brackets, that discounted price in brackets is going to be taxed at 15%. Sorry, 13.5%. So what do I multiply that number by to get 13.5%? Go ahead. Right. If I just multiply it by this, that's 13.5%. That is just going to be the tax on the discounted item. But if I change that 0 to a 1, that includes the discounted price. So there is your advanced statement. If I think about, well, what is 28% of the $160 jersey? I'm only paying $44.80 for that Montreal Canadiens jersey. And that is going to be multiplied by 1 and an additional, what was it again? 13.5%. So that is all of the discounted price plus a 13.5% tax. The final cost of the jersey is $50.85.